and welcome to Scottish Independence Podcasts. We have something a little different for you this week. Instead of asking the questions, Marlene and I were guests on the podcast from Radio Yes Cymru, hosted by Sion Jobbins. Here's how we got on.
Hello, Shwmai, and welcome to Radio Yes Cymru. And this is a big Scottish edition because there's a lot to discuss. I'm Sion Jobbins and I'm from Radio Yes Cymru, but we have Marlene Halliday from Scotland and Fiona McGregor, also from Scotland, conveniently enough, for a podcast about Scottish politics. Marlene and Fiona, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves quickly, and then we go into big topics about that Supreme Court's decision and then the stonking 56% for independence latest poll. So start with you, Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona McGregor. I'm one of the Indie Live podcast team, and we do the Scottish Independence podcast, which goes out every Friday. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi there, lovely to be here. I'm Marlene Halliday, and ditto to what Fiona just said. We're part of the broader Yes movement up here in Scotland. It's really good to be talking to yourself, Sean, and know that this is going out down in Wales.
Good. Well, we're very interested in Wales, Yes Cymru, and Radio Yes Cymru is also particularly interested, and there's just a lot to discuss. So we'll start with the Supreme Court, which now feels a long time ago, but it's probably about a month now, isn't it? 3 weeks ago. It looks to me, ladies, that the British establishment has shifted the goalposts, because my understanding of the British Constitution as it is, or what it is that basically precedent is then the law, isn't it? So I'd assume because there'd been a referendum on independence before, there's no legal reason then not to have another one. And maybe a lot of people were thinking that as well. The goalpost has now been moved. I think we'd all agree there needs to be some discussion with the metropolitan, the central power when independence happens, because you want it to be seen as legitimate and seen, recognised internationally. What's happened and how do people up in Scotland see this? How has it impacted? Maybe start with you, Fiona.
Well, I don't think it's the big disaster that perhaps at first we thought. I mean, to me, what would have been worse is if the Supreme Court had either come out with something really vague or said they couldn't decide it. So really, there were two choices. They could say, yes, Holyrood has the power to have a referendum, which would have been great, or it could say, no, it doesn't. And it said a clear, no, it doesn't. But that then just means the remedy is not in the world of legality, it's in politics, it's in democracy. And that's really the whole argument has shifted from being one of, what is the route or the process by which we're going to get independence to more, what does democracy mean in Scotland? Yeah. What does it mean to be part of a union which is no longer a voluntary union, if it ever was? So I'm not depressed about it at all. I just think, right, one door's been closed. Let's hammer down the alternative path, see where we get to.
So what is the alternative path then, Marlene?
I was just grinning a little bit when you mentioned the establishment shifting the goalposts. I mean, the establishment have been shifting the goalposts ever since Mrs. Thatcher. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher, but I am. And back in the 70s, she it was quite simple. She just said, well, yes, Scotland wants to be independent. Let them send a majority of independent supporting MPs down to Westminster. Well, of course, we've been doing that for the last decade almost. And up here, it's pretty well thought that if the establishment at the time in Westminster had thought there was any chance of losing a referendum in 2014, they would never have agreed to one. No. I mean, when they agreed, the Edinburgh Agreement, polling was something like 25% in support of yes, and then it got up to 45%. Yes. So I think, in a way, we're kind of used to the goalposts shifting. Yeah. And what struck me was, I mean, Fiona was saying she wasn't too depressed. Actually, I was a bit depressed on the day of the ruling, not because of the ruling, because that clarifies the situation. I was more depressed when I made the mistake of listening to an urgent question that was put by Ian Blackford in the House of Commons to Alistair Jack. Now, Alistair Jack is the Secretary of State for Scotland. Okay. And all the questions from Ian and then a lot of other Scottish MPs and also the Plaid Cymru leader in the Commons were, well, what is the legal route to leave the union? And Alistair Jack just
He didn't answer.
He never answered the question.
No.
He never answered the question. And in the end, when mention got made of all the mandates that Holyrood has, he just said, "We don't recognise that mandate." So it seems to me then that the government, and Westminster government, the Tory party in particular, they've just gone into a sort of what I've heard called an opposition of denial. They just deny it and deny it and deny it. And that's tough to get through. So I realise I haven't answered your question yet, but it gives a bit of a background to where we are. One current option is that the next time there's a general election, we'll make it into a quasi-referendum.
Yeah, so it's the Sinn Féin 1918 scenario in Ireland, and that gives legitimacy. And, this is how most countries have actually become independent. There's been a vote in the local, if you want, the local Soviet, the local constituent parliament, they vote for independence, and that's then negotiations start. That happened in Czechoslovakia, the Slovak became independent. This happened with Slovenia, and Croatia happened in the Baltic states as well to some extent. What is interesting, the UK now doesn't seem to me, maybe you know more because the discussion's more nuanced up there, there isn't a legitimate democratic path to independence. This is literally a worse situation than the constitution of the Soviet Union in 1990. So Soviet Union Constitution 1978 says, you have a right to independence, Article 74. Article 75 makes it impossible for you actually to get independence. They amended that because the Lithuanians called for independence and declared UDI in 1988, and their local Soviet did, and Estonians and Latvians followed suit. And then by 1990, Gorbachev, in a sort of panic, says, okay, we'll have a new constitution for the USSR, which was passed by the states which did boycott it, which says there's a path for independence. If your local Soviet votes for independence, then essentially you can have independence. And this is what happened in 1991 after the coup. So there was a path within the Soviet Union, ironically, for states to become independent, and that was legitimate. And that's how Lithuania was recognised in 1981 when it wasn't in 1988. If the UK state isn't given the path, I mean, I'm guessing they're looking at the Scots, what they think is a gotcha moment, which is like the Catalan referendum a few years ago, where the Catalans held a referendum. The vote actually for Catalan independence was actually higher even in terms of turnout and numbers than the Brexit vote of 52%. So even though it was essentially boycotted by the Spanish, more people actually voted for independence as a percentage in Catalonia than did for Brexit in the UK. So I mean, I'm guessing that's the idea, that you forced into having some kind of referendum, but nobody recognises, and then they come out and say unconstitutional what wasn't unconstitutional at one time, and then you're seen as the naughty people, the people spoiling the party.
That's
not going to happen
that's true. I mean, I suppose the background to all of this is, however we do it, I'm sure we will do it, but however we do it, it's got to be done in a way that's accepted by the international community. I mean, in particular by the UN and also the EU. And after that, other countries will, probably, I'm sure would support it as well. So that's the kind of background to it. And declaring UDI, I mean, that would be a real last resort, I think, up here. There's other things possibly to try. I mean, not least being that it's this particular Conservative government that's, refusing, just not minded to give us a referendum. They've got another 2 years probably after that, looking like they won't be in power. So that's a change of government. Now, the Labour government, UK Labour Party, isn't pro-independence, but I think maybe they wouldn't kind of turn their face quite so strongly against a referendum as the Tories are doing.
Is that wishful thinking, Fiona? Are they going to also try and kick I think they're betting on kicking the can down the road, and if something happens that goes wrong from their point of view, I don't know.
I don't know. It's hard to call. I mean, in a way, Labour's pretty much an irrelevance in Scotland. And it's quite difficult sitting up here to get a handle on just what exactly Starmer's attitude to a lot of things is. He appears to be pro-Brexit. He appears to be anti-trade union. He certainly has said he's talking to a certain group of his membership about not allowing any more referendums and cracking down on the jocks is kind of how we hear it, But I mean, in terms of what you were saying earlier about Soviet thing, the Supreme Court is quite a catch-22, really, what they've said, because the term "are we a colony" was part of that discussion. And the answer was, no, we're not a colony because we have democracy, but we're not allowed to use that democracy. So we have fewer rights than if we were a colony when we could go to the International Court of Justice.
And ironically, Emma Lewis is the head of law department here in Aberystwyth University, has asked the same question here for Wales. And because we are a colony, we were actually conquered militarily. You know, we could actually possibly have more rights to a referendum than Scotland, which is sort of rather surprising turn of events for us here in Wales. So it's worth reading this piece, certainly in Welsh and in English also by Emma about the situation in Wales. Yeah.
The one thing that our First Minister has been absolutely clear about, though, is we're not going to be doing any kind of Catalan style, unofficial wildcat thing. So really, I think the big issue is one of timing. And if it is the next general election becomes a plebiscite election for us, the way the polls are going at the moment, we would win that. And certainly the position in Scotland is with regard to political parties, there's a number of independent supporting parties. Obviously, the SNP is the one everybody's heard of. Yeah. But there's also the Greens, there's also ALBA, there's also ISP, there's also SSP. And, to have a sort of joined up approach, if they can manage to get that, and there's a lot of different issues in those different groupings, but if we could manage to get one independence mandate that they're standing on, and if the polling carries on for another 2 years, that would have to be politically the strongest statement we could send. And whether it's the Tories that win that election or whether it's Labour that win that election, I don't see how either of them could ignore that.
So are you suggesting that, I don't remember how many seats did I in Scotland, 53 is it, I think?
59, I think.
59, all right. Okay.
Although it's about to be reduced,
right.
but it's 59 at the moment.
So is the suggestion, I'm just winging this now, that the SNP stand in, 53 seats, the Greens stand in 2 or 3, and then the other parties, and then you're asking the independents, there's a clear vote for an independence ticket, but there's a plurality of pro-independence parties. Is that a suggestion? Or
yes, it is, but it's not. I mean, obviously, Westminster first past the post. There's no question that it might even be all the MPs go back as SNP. I mean, certainly it's looking like that the 6 Conservative Scottish MPs will not be there after an election. They'll go back with a huge majority, maybe 1 or 2 Labour MPs, but what's being proposed is that it's the number of votes cast, so not the number of constituencies, but the number of votes cast for any independent supporting party. I mean, in a general election, that'll really be SNP and the Scottish Greens, but maybe ALBA might stand some candidates. So anyway, you basically put together all of those votes. And if that comes to more than 50% of the total votes cast, then that's the quasi-referendum won.
But there is a danger there that, say that happens, and I'm not too sure of whatever seat is Morningside, which I hear about in Edinburgh, which is let's say SNP stand, and also the Green, and also ALBA, and then that vote is split, and then Labour, Tories squeak in. Then there's a risk in that, is it, if there's not some kind of agreement beforehand, or?
The SNP is by far the biggest of those parties, and in terms of a Westminster election, almost certainly that's going to be the party that stands. But because there are sort of different views within the Yes movement, I think there are some people who would want an alternative to vote for, whether it's ALBA or whether it's Green in some constituencies. Whether that would be enough to split the vote, I don't know. I mean, the polling at the moment is suggesting, as Marlene says, it'd be a wipeout apart from probably a couple of Labour.
Ian Murray from, is it Central Edinburgh? He'd be South Edinburgh. Morningside, yeah. I used to live in Morningside. I think it's a good thing that there are, although Fiona says it's the SNP that's by far the biggest party, and it will be through the SNP that will finally become independent. But it's a good thing that there are other parties. Fiona and I are part of the wider Yes movement. Right. And there are other parties there to be voted for. So I think is a good sign, actually.
One thing that's going to be really interesting, though, if you take the likes of Scottish Labour, who are a branch office, they're not an actual Scottish party, which is another issue. 40% of their membership are pro-Indie. So if you think about a plebiscite election, if you're saying to them, right, you might be a Labour Party member, you might have voted Labour your entire life, but you're in favour of independence, what are you going to do at that plebiscite election? Are you going to vote Labour anyway and overcome your indecide, or are you going to vote yes?
Yeah, so you're asking people to borrow their votes to the independence movement.
Yeah. For the sake of making it a yes vote. And
so let's say how this happens. It's a general election in 2 years' time. SNP, let's say, sweep the board, all seats mandate. So then the thinking is that the SNP will again go back to Supreme Court or the Westminster government and say, look, we've had a mandate, a clear mandate. Everyone knows exactly. The dogs in the street know what they're voting for. And there's over, let's say, there's 52% over the totality of the votes actually are for independence parties too. Then the idea then is the Supreme Court would find it very difficult to say no, or what's the next step?
I think that's not clear. I mean, there are some voices that would say, okay, if that happens, as you say, 52%, and hopefully it would be more, but at least, that itself is a referendum on independence, and Scottish Government will then open negotiations with the Westminster Government to take independence forward. So that's the one idea. The other idea is that it's not a referendum in itself, but it's another additional mandate to have a specific referendum. Now, I must say, if it was that, there's a lot of us up here would just go, how much do you have to do? So it's not clear yet. And as you said, it's only a few weeks since the Supreme Court ruling. Yeah. So we're only entering into thinking through how to do that. But those are the two options. I mean, for myself, I'd hope it would be, that's it, we've done it, we've voted for independence, and now, get round the table and work out the details of that. But who knows? What if the Westminster government says, no, we're not doing it?
Well, and that's not infeasible. I mean, I mean, there's a reason that this government, the Westminster system, has had 300, 400, 700 years of playing games and using power politics and Machtpolitik to bribe people, as they did in 1707 with you. They bribed the Irish in 1801. This is what they do, and there's institutional history and knowledge there about how to win these games and play the game as well.
Yes,
but they maybe haven't met many Scottish people, though, because the one thing that riles us up is being told you can't do it.
Yeah, I know, it's true. You tell us that we can't do something and we'll immediately do it, even though we might not even want to do it. I mean, the other thing about that, having a general election as a quasi referendum, is that it excludes two groups of voters. So up here, voting age is 16.
Yeah, in Wales now as well.
Yeah, and in Wales. So if it's a referendum just up here as the last time, then the 16 plus are able to vote, and they are highly in favour of, I mean, something like 70% for people 16 to 25. And the other group of people up here who we're excluded from a general election are EU citizens living in Scotland.
Right, yeah.
Now, last time, the EU citizens living up here tended, not completely, but tended to vote no. Because they were frightened, that we'd end up out of the EU. They would also vote yes, but they won't be able to vote in a general election. So there's definitely a risk to doing it.
So moving on from that, so obviously I think the Unionist parties, Tory and Labour, thought they had a gotcha moment with the Supreme Court, and they came out with nonsense about unconstitutional. Well, it was unconstitutional one time for women to vote, wasn't it? And the other things which that was unconstitutional one time as well. The latest poll, 56% came out this week. That's pretty solid now. I'm guessing these numbers can sort of go up and down because there's a margin of error, a couple of people out of the house. But it's going in one direction. I think now, it seems to me there's been a tipping point. It's been hovering on 50% for a while. There seems to be a 5% odd people now think, okay, that's it. We'll show them type of thing. And it's made people's minds up. And, am I right? Is it basically people just being put off by the Supreme Court telling people they can't vote for independence, or there's something else as well?
Well, I think that could well be a big part of it. And as you say, the figures sort of hover between. It's been as high as 58 at one point. The direction of travel is positive, and that partly is a demographic thing as well, because the only group left now, the only age group left who are more pro-union is the over 65s. Now, at one point it was sort of the mid-40s, but now if you're over 65, it's about 40-60 there. So even that's not a huge vote. So gradually, as time goes on, the younger folk come into the electorate, and it does sort of move.
But it is quite staggering, because obviously at the same time, and something's clicked down in the rest of the UK with the Tories budget in September, and Labour Party is now very strong, certainly here in Wales and in England. It wouldn't have been impossible to foresee that would have had some effect in Scotland, where people say, okay, we'll give the union another chance. We'll see what Sam has got to do. And so I was half expecting maybe it to be some kind of surge in the Labour Party vote in Scotland, and maybe a sort of, okay, if there is going to be a Labour government, it's different for the last 10, 12 years. Let's give it a chance. Is that not happening then? No,
I don't think so. And I think Gordon Brown is a big part of the issue, because Gordon Brown is a personality that is really associated with the 2014 referendum because of his infamous vow, which he had no right to make and wasn't kept. It was broken the next day. Everybody knows that. So the fact that he is their go-to man, and they've wheeled him out yet again to come up with some other permutation of a federal UK, which everybody knows can't work unless you break up England.
Yeah, it has no legs.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is partly, Labour were in power for so long in Scotland. The fact that we've lost faith with them really because they stood on that platform in 2014 with the Tories. And I don't think there's any coming back from that, regardless of what Starmer does.
And so even if, say, Labour win the next election in 2 years' time, would there be a feeling Scotland say, okay, well, let's see what this lot have got to say? They'd be maybe different from the past.
I don't.
Well, I doubt it. I mean, obviously Labour polling in England, presumably in Wales as well, has gone up hugely in the last sort of 6 months, year in particular, and it's gone up a little bit here in Scotland, but nothing like the same amount. Right. I mean, there's certainly not going to be a whole swathe of Labour MPs going back down to Westminster from Scotland. I mean, there may be more than the one that they have at the moment, but it won't be very much. So it's always going to be, even if it's a new Labour government, having to talk to the SNP.
So Labour needs to start thinking what their strategy is to dealing with an SNP with a mandate for independence, possibly.
Do you know the one thing that would really, and I don't understand why they don't do it, the one thing that would really save Labour in Scotland is to set up a Scottish Labour Party, not a branch office of the UK one, because then you would have them actually focused on issues in Scotland. And if they set up a Scottish Labour Party and supported independence, they could be a huge part of designing a new country. And I don't understand why Labour in Scotland does not want to be in a position of influence for good for a newly independent country where they would be hugely useful given the outlook. And yet, because they're just this branch office of a UK party which is looking in a completely different direction and trying to win Tory voters who are appalled at how far right the Tory government is. But
I think that's true. And I mean, south of the border, south of the Scottish-England border, the SNP is, always just described as it's divisive, it's always going on about independence. Why don't you go back and run your country properly? Well, if you look at what the SNP have been in power up here since 2007, and if you look at what they've done, they're a left-leaning political party. The kind of policies that they brought in and the things that they've done, like the baby box, we've taken over some of the benefit system, and there's a completely new approach to that. So if you look at, basically they're a left-leaning political party for a left-leaning country. And as Fiona says, that why on earth the Scottish Labour supporters don't get in on that is beyond me, really.
Well, I think they still think that Westminster is the proper parliament, and they still think that Scotland is not really a proper country. I think it's as simple as that. It's a cultural vote, and in the end, it's nothing to really do with economics, any policies. So about this polling, then. So I mean, that's pretty chunky. I mean, that's a significant yes, going one way. I mean, is there anything looking forward, do you think, could damage that and bring it down to 50% or something? Or
there's always something.
There's always something. And I mean, like Fiona mentioned, it has been up at 58 before. Now, that happened in the first year of the COVID pandemic. Pretty certain that the reason that happened was that people in Scotland saw every day, they saw Nicola Sturgeon behind a podium with her medical, team, giving really good information. She stood there every day and announced the number of people who were, seriously ill, people who died. It took a lot of guts to do that. Yeah. And then they compared to what happened when number 10's COVID announcements came and all the kerfuffle about PPE as well. So I think at that point there was a boost to the folk who were saying yes to independence, because they saw, I mean, admittedly in circumstances we would never have wanted, but they saw a Scottish government and a Scottish outlook and, looking to care for the people in Scotland that was far better than what they saw coming out from.
And a similar thing happened.
So it went up. There was, but then it went back down again.
Yeah.
So we're up at 56. I think there's been 3 polls since that Supreme Court ruling, and they're all up 54, right. 55, 56. But it can go back down again. And what we have to do is what we've always had to do, which is get out in the streets and make programs like this one you're making and our equivalent, and make that 56% absolutely solid. I mean, I don't think it's absolutely solid yet, but it's heading there.
So you're listening to me, Sion Jobbins from Radio Yes Cymru, talking to Marlene Halliday and Fiona McGregor from Scottish Independence Podcast. And we're having a good discussion about Scotland, learning a lot here. Thanks for your time. So this brings me maybe to the last part of the discussion about what actually happens now. So I'm listening to some Scottish podcasts. I read the Scottish blogs and stuff. I mean, there has been criticism of the SNP for being too timid, not having the referendum earlier, or pushing it when the iron was hot straight after Brexit. That people are maybe feeling that there have been rallies that they are now maybe happening too frequently or not frequent enough, or there's not enough street events happening. Do you think the SNP as the main vehicle for independence, has it done the right thing? Has it taken the right course, or has it been too timid? Or do you think they're playing the long game and allowed the Westminster establishment to make mistakes for them?
The one thing that SNP has in spades, as it were, is being able to play the long game. They've been playing the long game since, the 70s, when they first started to get a few MPs down in Westminster. So that's what they excel at now. That also means that you've got to be patient. Nicola Sturgeon is one for playing the long game. She's also, it's plenty of people up here think she's cautious, too cautious. But, on the other hand, look, we are at 56% in the polls. So you're not going to say no to that. It's like people might not like Keir Starmer, but he's 20% ahead of the Tories. You're not going to complain about that. Yeah. So they do play the long game. I mean, I think so. There's, as you said, there are, especially the last, I don't know, Fiona, maybe the last kind of 2 or 3 years has been more voices coming in, maybe speaking out of frustration, but also genuine attempts to try and say, well, are there other ways that we could do? And I mean, some of them, like UDI, really are not going to happen, and not just because Nicola Sturgeon's cautious, but because it's not the way to get what we want. But there's other groups thinking through other possibilities. So it's quite a mix, and it can, at least on social media, it can be quite a brusque kind of arguments kind of going on. But the polls for the SNP keep coming back over 50% of people saying they'll vote for them. That's the place to be if you're a politician.
And the important thing isn't when it happens, it's that we win.
Yeah.
There's no point in going too early and losing, because the next referendum realistically is the last referendum. We can't keep coming back and back and back. So certainly the older we get, the more impatient we get. But the thing with the SNP's kind of gradualist approach, I think that probably is why we've got parties like ALPA have sprung up. It's people who want, ALPA is something like 0.4% of the electorate, but about half of the activists. So they're the ones who want to push and go further and faster, and sometimes that can be counterproductive when we get involved in internal spats. How much of that gets seen outside of the bubble of the yes activists? I don't know. To me, the fact that we've had to do less ourselves because Westminster has just been so appalling for so long, they kind of make the argument for us. And I think if anything pushes to make it happen quicker, it's to limit the damage we see coming. I mean, the thing that terrifies me right now coming down the road is this idea that they're going to privatise the NHS. They're going to sell it off to rich Tory donors. That appalls me. And whilst our NHSs are separate, Scottish NHS is not gone anywhere near the amount of privatisation that's already happened in England, but we can't protect it with a devolution settlement.
No, we can't. Same in Wales. There's some things which are being sort of ring-fenced, but you can't. If the budget's been cut in Westminster with plan formula, then it's essentially cut here in Wales and in Scotland. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I suppose you have your own version of the Barnett formula.
Yeah.
But going back to that, the long game, SNP have been in power since 2007, either a minority government or majority. And now, when the First Minister and the SNP invited the Scottish Greens to join in a kind of alliance, which they took a wee while to work out. So there's now two Scottish Green ministers, part of the Scottish government. Those are all things that, just kind of slowly have an effect on that portion of the Scots public who are not convinced yet. And it's getting smaller and smaller. It's only maybe 5-6%, something like that.
Yes, and it's interesting in Wales, Scottish, the Welsh Green Party, though it's still part of the England and Wales Green Party, so I'm not too sure how that works. Yeah. But they're now in favour of independence. So it's an interesting happening there, and I'm guessing a lot of that is down to
and other things are happening up here. I mean, yes, there's a continued wrangling with Westminster, but as we've been saying, the independent side of that tends to come out well because of the ineptness of the Westminster side. But there's other things happening up here that are just positive, initiatives. So Mike Russell, who's the president of the SNP, he's put together a small kind of consulting group to work with an expert in writing constitutions, a chap called Elliot Bulmer. And out of that has come a draft constitution for an independent Scotland, because the independence day one, we have to have something in place to just protect basic, Scottish citizens and human rights. So that's all coming through, and I mean, it's still in the draft form, and it is only a piece of paper. It's not like a piece of paper that even the SNP have, accepted. But it's a very positive. I mean, I'm part of the group, so I know what's in it. It's a very, very positive. It's a very positive, writing, and it's us saying, this is the kind of people we are. Yeah. This is the kind of society we want, and this is the kind of nation we want. And it's brilliant. So that's just one example, but there's other sort of positive things happening that are not SNP themselves, but hopefully at some point.
It seems to me that some people want to go back to the excitement of 2014 and the whole movement, but that's very knackering. Campaigning is tiring. I mean, people need to have it. When we've had big campaigns here, maybe for the language, people then need a break, literally, just to wind down, go back to their family, maybe concentrate on their career or something. They can't be in this sort of fervent zone for I don't think more than a year and a half. I think there's some kind of natural cut-off in that respect. So people need to have time to wind down. And movement, I think, also needs time to get new people in. People get disillusioned, people get fed up or whatever, they move away. So, I mean, but there is a big, maybe you need to make sure that there's something happening, because you need to hit the ground running if there is some kind of a referendum, another vote.
Yeah.
So
our young folk, I think that's our salvation, everybody's salvation. But I mean, they're pro-indie for sure, but the kind of things they seem to be campaigning about is things like the environment. It's things like the, democracy and land use and, lots, a much wider sphere of things, because I think they've always grown up with devolution. So they've never known it when we didn't have it. And they're looking to the next step. What's the barriers that we could overcome by becoming independent? Yeah. But in the Yes movement, if you go out on a march or something, they're our age. There's And I look at the Welsh all under one banner marches, which have been phenomenal. The last couple were really, really big. And it takes me back to what it was like when we started that. And it's that we're all on the same side. We're all going for the same thing. And it was the energy there was lovely. Whereas if you look at the independence movement where we are, there's factions, there's disagreements, there's different approaches. There's some people won't go on all under one banner marches, so some people won't do something else, and in a way it's much more fragmented.
But I would give my right arm for a government which is committed to independence. We've just had a constitutional commission here which says independence on the agenda, which is the first time ever, which is good to see.
I think that's true. I mean, it's true what Fiona says. It's like the actual marches now are far less, well supported than they used to be. But we're in especially compared with that one down in Wales. But then Scotland is in a different stage of that journey to independence. I mean, we've got the independent support in people down in Westminster and in Holyrood, and with a very good working majority, huge majority in Westminster, but a very decent working majority in Holyrood. So maybe something like a march to galvanise folk is still really going to be a good thing to happen to keep down in Wales, but not so important up here that we're doing different things.
The message we were sending with the big marches was to the Scottish government to say, hey, get us another referendum at that point, rather than anybody else. But I love Mark Drakeford. I mean, I can't understand why he's not pro-indie. He's not that far away, is he?
I think I think people in the independence movement here would like to project that he's some indie closet. He's a unionist through and through. I don't think he will ever come for independence, and I think it's a mistake.
I was just going to say that the other thing up here is that, there's also really there's a lot of on the ground, yes supporting groups. So I'm in one that's Yes Northwest Glasgow. I'm also involved in Pensioners for Independence. So there's a lot of those groups active around the country, and then there's groups like Believe in Scotland, which is an campaigning offshoot of Business for Scotland, and they're doing amazing kind of work to bring up to have the kind of leaflets and information to go out and campaign with. And then there's setups like the Common Weal, which is I've sometimes described it as a think tank, but they don't. They will agree that they're a think tank, but they're a think tank, and they're also a campaigning body. Yeah. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on. Besides being a big march.
Yes, and you want that plurality as well here in Wales. I mean,
you do.
Organised a meeting in the Royal Welsh Winter Show, which is a big agriculture event here last week. Was it? Discuss independence for agriculture, which is a good, important step.
So are you? Can I ask a question? Are you optimistic about Wales? Going further?
Well, I'm. With Welsh, the default setting is to be pessimistic. But no, I think if Scotland. Well, this is the important thing happening with Yes Cymru now, is to create that infrastructure, that network of people to get the argument out, and that's happening, and that's good stuff. And this has never happened before in Wales either. So Plaid Cymru, the main nationalist party, was always a bit shy of using the word independence. There's some kind of ideological reasoning that no country is actually independence. What is independence? Which I think really was cowardice for just coming out and saying they want independence. But so until Yes Cymru came along, really there wasn't anyone making the case clearly for independence and say, okay, maybe it's never going to happen, but we have to make that case. I think that case has been stronger. We had a constitutional convention. They gave their first draft this week, which has said independence is one of the options there, which is a big step forward.
Huge.
And I think a lot of people still, the Labour Party is very strong here. I think a lot of people will go for that. But I think when Scotland starts moving, I think a lot of people can start asking questions. I mean, the idea of people like the idea of being part of the home natures, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. I think people quite like that in Wales for lots of different reasons. But if Scotland's gone and Northern Ireland then is going to reunite to the south sometime, then that family of nations is gone then, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's got to be for something as well. I mean, one of the things with independence is because there are things that we see that we want to do as a country that we're prevented from doing. I mean, even something like the, drug consumption room, something that should be our business that we can't do because somebody sitting in London won't let us, so they can complain about.
Yeah, well, and this is
issues.
This is the problem we have in Wales, where we have a Labour government now who doesn't want Wales to have control over judiciary and police. So there's things we could be doing differently instead of drug control. The incarceration rates here in Wales is much higher than England, disgracefully so. But unfortunately, we have a Labour Party who wants to keep it in England and Wales judiciary. So we're not having a government who's actually fighting for Wales. They're fighting for trying to win a seat, and some Welsh MPs to get their ministerial car and the little boxes in Westminster. So we're still faced with a party which is inherently unionist and will defer to Westminster. The sections within the party, about 40%, 50% want independence, which support independence. But I think the type of people who get into the MP will consistently vote against more powers to the Welsh Parliament, against their own party running powers in Wales, which is absolutely bizarre. It is absolutely crazy. But then they're all they'll support Independence Day for Barbados or India, whatever. The First Minister will congratulate them on the independence, and of course, Estonia doing good stuff.
Well, the other narrative is that we're separatists.
Of course,
language, and so on the 4th of July we celebrate American Separatism Day.
which literally fought a war against Crown forces. But right, I think we're coming into the end of time. Fiona McGregor and Marlene Halliday, thanks for making the time. It's been very interesting and very informative to learn what's happening in Scotland. So much good things happening there. Keep up the good work. You are a beacon of hope for us here in Wales. We've got a lot to learn from how things are conducted there. And hopefully your fight and your success will give us strength to make sure we're not stuck in some kind of England and Wales rump stump, like some kind of Belarus to Russia. You've been listening to Radio Yes Cymru. I think you're going to share this podcast on the Scottish Independence podcast as well.
Yes, we will.
Welcome to do that. And then maybe we can meet up in a few years' time, a few months' time, and see how things are progressing there as well.
Yeah,
thank you.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
And thanks for speaking again.
Bye.
Thank you. Well, that was great fun. We really enjoyed that. And if you'd like to know more about Yes Cymru, they do have a website. They also have a YouTube channel. And if you have a look, you'll be able to watch the video of our interview with Sion. Or rather, Sean's interview with us. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye now.